Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest This Week in the Field with the Handyman in the Field. I'm Dustin, and this week was another interesting week in the field. There's a lot of different things that happened. If you've been paying attention to the last couple episodes, I was talking about how we had storms. We had another big storm in the area, and it kind of made some things have to shift around. So I had a bunch of different things that popped up. Some things that were very unexpected, some things that you kind of have to just learn how to roll with the punches, juggle the stuff that comes up. So let's start off with the beginning of the week. So I typically do a lot of my admin work, at least not sending invoices. I try to send the invoices pretty immediately after the job gets complete, just to make sure that the money's rolling in on a regular basis. I don't really want to be in a situation where I'm not sending invoices and then that's just keeping me from having money in my accounts. That said, there is a lot of other admin stuff, running the accounting numbers, your ledgers, all of that stuff to keep track of how all the money's coming in. Also, when you have employees, you have to run payroll, but I also check their timesheets every week to make sure that everything's good and then lock everything in place so that way it's just a consistent thing. So I typically try to do that on Saturday or Sunday, depending on how much stuff I've got going on, either personally or if I end up picking up a couple little things for Saturday for work as well. That said, I had a couple of things that I had to take care of last Saturday. And because of that, I didn't get to creating the schedule for my employees or doing the timesheets from the previous week until Sunday. Interestingly, in the midst of trying to get some stuff taken care of right away in the morning, I got a text message from one of my helpers that said that due to some stuff that was happening, he wasn't going to be able to work with me or work for us for the remainder of the summer. Now, to be fair, it's not a huge amount of time. Realistically, they had maybe 7 more working days, 7 more possible working days, since they don't work on the weekends before they actually go back to school. And I'm well aware that once they go back to school, they're no longer going to be working with me because of how our hours are compared to what they have available. So it wasn't as if, to a certain degree, I was left in a lurch. At the same time, the way we had been running things, at least for the purpose of trying to get everybody hours and things like that, it is a little difficult for one of those helpers to not affect another one of the helpers. That helper specifically was in football, well, it still is in football with my son, and my son would come home from practice along with him. They would change and then meet back up, and then they would go to the job sites. So typically I could schedule them at the same time and then they could go do things. And I would send them, independently in certain cases to take care of things that I don't necessarily need to be there for, because my son has, a certain level of experience. That's fine. I can explain things to him and it takes no time at all. The issue becomes once that employee is no longer working, he still comes back with my son after football, but the issue becomes now my son doesn't have a way to get to work. Now the other employee, because my son doesn't have his driver's license yet, the other employee has the ability to drive, but the problem is that employee is the one that I've been using as a helper specifically for jobs that I go to. Not that I can't send him with my son, but the problem is that there's a limit on what I can and can't do. There's certain days where I personally only need one helper with me. Last year, it was typically my son. Well, no, it was always my son because he was the only person that was working with me. He would work with me on certain things, and because he would work with me, I would just have to make sure that either I got back when he had, when he was done with practice, or I'd have to make sure that I planned things around. The problem was that last year, him or his friends did not have driver's license, so it made it pretty straightforward. One of us had to pick him up from practice, We did carpool with the other family, the other boy who is in football with him, who's a helper. We carpooled with them, and I typically drove them in the morning, but my son didn't work very many hours last year, just in general. So long story short, one employee quitting puts a wrench in how things have to go. The problem is that because of the wrench, if I have to be, the calls just keep coming. I am not kidding. I think I've had more calls and text this message for various different things than anything else. If I have to be here to get one, or if I only need one employee, I have to basically arrange my schedule so that it's just my son. I'm trying to primarily get him hours. He's saving up to get a vehicle so that once he does get his license, he has the ability to, get himself around. That was the whole primary reason of hiring his friends, was in some cases trying to make sure that he had a way to get to work so that he could make money to save up. You could call that nepotism. That's fine. I'm fine with that. Those people also were getting paid in a lot of cases to actually drive to job sites, which was not the original plan, but became the plan. They were getting paid to drive to job sites because they were collectively together. So the way I attributed it was, because you were collectively getting together as a team and driving to a place, that's when you actually start getting paid, rather than you get paid when you get to the job site. So the ones who were driving my son, they were getting paid extra time to literally just drive to the job site, which most jobs don't do. That said, it just put a wrench. So a lot of the week I couldn't use the other helper, the one that didn't quit, because I don't have a way of having enough work. There was one day where I actually could have had both of them work. The problem was that was the one day that helper had a day that they requested off for a doctor's appointment. So the thing is, it was very difficult to try to get multiple helpers on different jobs because it just didn't work out with timing. So that was a wrench that I had to deal with immediately. I don't have any specific reason, or I don't have any specific reasons why he couldn't work the remainder of the season, but it just that, he said it was due to some situations outside of his control or something on that line. So I'm leaving the door open for him to potentially work with us next summer. I think for young people, it's important to learn how to juggle. He does have another job as well. He works at a local concert place or a local venue that does concerts. So the thing is, he probably was overworked. In most cases, they don't work more than 20, 25 hours a week for me. But if he's then also in football and also working somewhere else, I can see how you get potentially burned out, especially as football season ramps up. So that was my Sunday, trying to figure out how to juggle everything for the week, because the porch project that we've been working on, I need to have two people there at once, and ideally two people that's not myself. And the timing of everything just wasn't working out the way I would have preferred. Then the other issue is that we have just the steps that need to take place with certain things. Those steps require a certain element of getting things done in a certain order, and I have to be present for some, but I don't have to be present for others. So long story short, it was kind of a headache. But then we jump over to Monday. So Monday I had a little bit of admin time in the morning. After that, most of these days I waited for my son to get done with practice so that way he could go with me to work. Monday we were supposed to go back to the caulking job that we looked at the week before. Turns out when we set up the ladder and got much more close, it wasn't just caulking. There's a lot of tuck pointing issues all over this house. I don't do tuck pointing, so I essentially had to tell the customer, unfortunately, there's not much I can do. When it came to there was a light fixture that also needed to be taken care of. That light fixture is bad, and he can't. It's old enough where there's no way he's going to get a match, so he's going to have to replace all of them. And he stated that they were having issues with their roof after the recent storms, and a lot of that other stuff is going to have to wait. So unfortunately, we didn't make any money from that. Hopefully we were able to help so that in the future they do contact us for other things, but sometimes stuff like that just happens. After that, we had kind of a lull because we were trying to do a commercial job, but they aren't on site until 3 o'clock. So we needed to make sure that we had needed to take care of a couple of things. So the commercial job was going back to the door job that I brought up a couple weeks ago. It's a baseball academy. They had a, standard commercial door, push door, that had the bar across it, and the closer on it was broke. So when we were there the last time, there was a part that we were missing. I reinstalled the old closer and made some adjustments so that way it could work for the time being. And then after that, we moved to getting the additional parts. So this time we went back, got everything installed, got everything good to go. Everything was good. The tenant was happy. The owner was happy that the work got done. It just was obviously a long delay because this was one of those jobs where we got delayed because of parts. But that job got done. It was $875 for the work that we did there. The majority of that is parts. There's a lot of parts involved in that. The expense on that is insane for the parts. Jumping over to Tuesday, so this is going back before the 4th of July. We were reached out by a customer that I had worked for before, saying that they wanted to get their bathroom. I'm classifying it as a refresh project, but what it actually is like they had a bathroom. They had a massive plumbing thing that needed a bunch of drywall taken out. So they put the drywall back in, but weren't confident enough to make sure everything was smooth. So we're coming in, doing the drywall, and then essentially assembling everything back, putting the vanity back, hooking all that stuff back up where it needs to be. Hooking the toilet back up. We're painting the walls. I'm pretty sure that's it, but the majority of it's drywall. So I wanted to get the first coat of drywall on, get over there, sand it, get the first coat on. I prefer to stack drywall jobs where I'm only on site for about an hour and then come back for, the next time and the next time and the next time, rather than just being on site and sitting and waiting for it to dry, because you can never control the humidity. And to be quite honest, we've had a lot of issues with humidity just because of how many storms we've gotten recently. So my son was with me all day this day, specifically because he didn't have practice that day. So they had a scrimmage at night. That's what it was. So we went to the bathroom, sanded it, put the drywall, mudded it, leveled everything out. It actually looked pretty good. It's still going to need a second coat before we go back to, reinstall everything, but got that taken care of. From there, we started to get severe weather warnings. And the next thing we were supposed to do was we were driving to the porch job to take measurements for trim. And the initial idea was to get to this place, get the measurements so that we could return on Wednesday with the trim. So we went there, took some measurements. While we were there, we got tornado warnings and the sirens started going off for that. We got the measurements that we needed, explained to the customer that we were planning on being back the next day, but it was all dependent on weather. Here's a spoiler. We didn't get back there at all the rest of the week. After that, we started driving to an estimate for a member of my LaTip group. They had a project that they wanted me to take a look at, and he was about 10 minutes away from that customer's house. So I wanted to get over there. So as we were actually driving towards this house, it felt as if the sirens were actually following us. We were going southeast, and the more we drove, the sirens started airing, and like almost immediately as we were getting into that next area, which was kind of crazy. As we got to the house, the winds had started to pick up, but it wasn't barely raining. It was just drizzling. We were at this customer's house for maybe 15, 20 minutes. Within the 15, 20 minutes, just to put this in perspective, actually, I take this back. Before we got into the house, my mother called me and said that they had massive winds where she was, and there was a bunch of tree branches from a tree that fell on the house, and she was concerned that there was a hole in the roof, and I needed to get over there as soon as I could. Now, the problem is, if you pay attention to how I do stuff, my schedule's typically pretty packed. I don't have a lot of openings. That's a huge problem, when this sporadic stuff comes up. So you have to kind of shift things. So as I was at this job, looking at everything, and the sirens are going off, the wind picked up, the rain picked up. We must have got, I'm not exaggerating, maybe 3/4 to an inch of rain in like 20 minutes. So it was flooding everything. The power ended up going out at that customer's house. What that customer needs is they have LVP flooring that had popped up because there's wood floor underneath, and the floor got wet and it warped and popped up some of the flooring. There was that. There was a gutter repair, very low level on the first floor. And then there was a drywall repair, which unfortunately, because of its location, I just won't touch it. When we left there, we walked out of the house, and like I said, there was branches all over the place, large branches. Luckily, nothing hit my truck this time around. However, the water had gotten so high that just to get to the truck, which was like just walking from the door down the two car deep driveway, there was water that basically saturated our feet. From there, my intention was to basically, my goal was, we had another customer that we had already had on, that was something we picked up last minute. There was a customer who sent me, an existing customer who sent me an email over the weekend saying, can you do this plumbing repair? It was just replacing a valve for a toilet. And I could do it, and I really wanted to do it because those are easy and they're profitable jobs. So I wanted to make sure I could do it. He had a very small opening because he wanted to get it done before Friday because they were having some company come into town. So we decided to leave there, start driving towards this house, and everything was flooded. I mean, everything was flooded. We had, in some cases, 3 to 4 feet of water, in some of the spouts or spots where you have to drive underneath the bridges and things like that. It was pretty bad. Damage-wise, it wasn't as bad as the one 2 weeks ago. However, there was areas in my area that did experience some of that really bad damages. This time around, so for the first time around, I don't think I said this, but there was reports ultimately that there were 7 tornadoes within essentially my service area. This time around, there was 5 tornadoes within the service area. Now, these aren't like humongous tornadoes. It's just whatever the meteorologists classify as tornadoes. The next town over where I get a lot of my work, that town had a tornado that literally traveled almost completely through it. They were getting a lot of the damage that my town specifically got the 2 weeks prior. So get to the valve. It was very straightforward, very quick job, $245. It was just taking out the old valve, putting in a new one, and we put in a new supply line as well. After that, we drove to my mother's house to get the branches off her house. Luckily, she didn't have any horrible major damage. It was just some shingle damage that I'll need to get, addressed in the future. Took pictures of everything for her so she can, file a claim through her insurance company. And then the other thing that happened was, while we were getting this massive amount of rain in the very brief time, I had another customer who I recently did the bathtub repair, and I have a bunch of other pending projects. That was a referral from somebody. They called me saying that their sump pump was not pumping water, and they were trying to figure out what to do because the battery backup wasn't working. And my response was, if the water's getting too close to the top of the pit, start bailing water out with a bucket, because that's your best bet. She has a bathroom downstairs. Just start getting buckets of water and pulling it out and throwing it down the bathtub just to relieve the amount of water in the pit until the rain dies down. The one plus about the rain recently is, while we have been getting a lot of rain, it's in these bursts, and the bursts is what you can't keep up with. So that was my suggestion to her. But she also had water coming in a different spot that she saw leaking from the ceiling in the basement, nowhere near the sump pump. So there was a lot of different issues that she wanted. And then she also said she had water coming in her patio doors. So to relieve her stress, I basically went out there. After I dropped off my son, I went out there and took a look at all the different problems. The sump pump, basically what happened was the backup pump was disconnected. So there was no way it was actually working. The husband voiced his concern of that pump was not needed. I think there was just a massive amount of miscommunication, primarily because he wasn't on site and he couldn't see from when you put a light down in the pit, you can't see what's happening. And it's very difficult to point to certain things and say, this is how this is supposed to be. So long story short, I told her I'd be back the next day to, address the issues with the sump pump. The husband was convinced that he had a pump that was a dual pump and it would always work. And there's only one pump in the pit. There was a backup pump. The backup pump wasn't working. The primary pump, I think it just got overwhelmed, to be honest. Either that or no, I think their power did go out briefly. So that would be the other reason, is the primary pump wasn't getting any power. So that was that. Wednesday, I had my LATIP meeting in the morning, which half the people weren't there because of power issues and the storm stuff. So the meeting was pretty smooth, I guess. Smooth is not the right word. It was more of the meeting occurred, and that was that. After that, I went back to that customer's house. At that point, when I took everything out of the pit, I realized that there was no way that what the husband was saying was correct, and that backup pump was just disconnected and it needed to be reconnected. So reconnected that, verified that everything was working the way it was supposed to, checked a couple of other things that she wanted to. It actually started raining pretty hard while we were there. The problem is that some customers don't realize that sometimes freak stuff just happens with this weather and there's nothing you can do. She was convinced that the water that came in over her patio door was something that could be fixed. It's not that there's a broken seal or anything. It's that her track for her door is just not very tall. And I found out after the fact, or after I did a little bit more diagnostic on it, that she has two dogs that have hair, and the hair is probably clogging up the weeping holes, and that's what the issue is. So there's a couple of things that you can do, but there's certain other things where it's just an odd thing that happens. And customers don't always like the answer of sometimes things happen. They want a solution almost all the time. So that sump pump fix was $180. It was pretty much my minimum, even though I technically was there for 2 different trips, at least an hour. After that, I picked up my son, and we picked up a real quick project from a LATIP member who had a rack that needed to be built in their basement, moved from their garage down to the basement, and then built, and then just some minor shifting things around for her. That was $185. And then after that, we went back to the doctor's house we've been to recently, because he reached out that day and asked if I had any time to add in a swing by over there to take care of some stuff. So it was just basically moving some stuff around. There was a soap dispenser that he had installed in his master shower that they haven't been using in a while, and they discovered there was mildew in it. So that was a concern. They wanted it removed. So we removed that, cleaned up the wall. He had a TV downstairs that needed to be programmed with the antenna to get channels, and also hooked up to the internet so that he could use certain streaming things. And then there was some just miscellaneous boxes and tables that needed to get moved around because he's trying to organize stuff. So because that's an ongoing thing, there's no charge there. It's just one of those things where when there's enough, I end up sending an invoice, and I keep track of it. And that was all of Wednesday. Thursday, we had, my morning was supposed to be a very brief meeting. Last weekend, I discovered there was a new handyman in our area that had started to promote themselves on Facebook. And my thought process behind this was, let me reach out, because nobody ever reaches out to anybody. It always feels like everybody is, closed off. competition is competition. And I don't always view it like that. I view competition as, one, if he's starting out, he's not going to get the same customers that I get. I charge a certain amount. Let's see, what, the stuff that he was saying he would do is building flat pack furniture and things like that. I don't do that anyway. So if I can have, refer him some work and then he can toss some things my way, all good. So I reached out to technically his wife because she was the one posting the stuff on Facebook. She ended up giving me his number. We agreed to meet for breakfast on Thursday. I thought it was going to be like a brief meeting. It ended up being like 3 hours long, and it was fruitful in the sense of like learning how things go. He had a lot of questions that he asked. He made some comment about how he was aiming for like $35 to $40 an hour, to which I said, you're undercharging. Start out immediately at 50 and then try to get to 75 within a month, because the problem is people will just take advantage of you if you price yourself too low. One of the projects he had just worked on was building some flat pack cabinets similar to these, but the customer had them on Amazon. He didn't explicitly say how he came to price it. He said that the customer paid him $325 and he was there for about 6 hours, and he was very happy with that. And I was like, well, that's about $50 an hour. It's not a horrible, it's not a horrible amount of money. But when you start to end up having overhead and insurance, and he said that they're in the process of trying to make an LLC and get insurance. The other option in my mind, not option, but the other idea in my mind was, if they're not super invested in the idea of actually making this a business, one of the things that they could do is I could potentially bring him on as somebody who could work with me, gauge what skills he has, things like that. I constantly turn away that cheaper work because it's difficult for me to charge as much as I need to charge. But by bringing on an additional person, you can pay them and have them do some of those cheaper items. It's very clear that he is not looking to work with, not with somebody, but for somebody. He wants to do his own thing. I respect that. And if he ever has issues and he doesn't want to keep doing it down the line, the door is always open for, potentially working for me. In an ideal world, it would be great because he has his own tools. He has his own vehicle. He can do the things that I, would send him to go do. But I think the other issue is that he's trying to get his plumbing license. He's a third year plumbing apprentice. He's still going to school. And the issue becomes, he's obviously only got so many hours that he can work because he's still going to school to be a plumber, but he also could potentially get a job at a plumbing company to, get more time in. And the issue becomes, if that's what he's looking to do, that, great. It seemed like that's what his wife wants him to do. He personally wants to make his own thing and do his own thing. And if he can make the handyman thing profitable and make money, then he will. So good on him for that. But it's more of like, getting to establish yourself with, I guess, other people in the area, because I don't interact with a lot of the other companies in the area, mostly because there's 2 franchises and they try to scoop up as much work as they can. And they view people like myself as direct competition because we can charge slightly less than them, and they have way more overhead to worry about than we do. So there's that. So that was that. After that, we had a customer. This was a Lit member who had asked me to do some work almost a month ago, or maybe over a month ago. And it was a punch list of various different things. He had 2 doors that had some issues with their hinges. The hinges had come out and he needed the doors put back. There was a toilet he wanted replaced. And then there was a drywall patch in an office that needed to get repaired from a leak. And then they had a leaky shower faucet. And the shower faucet was not something we were looking to repair. It's more of like, I need to figure out what parts I need so that I can do the repair in the future. So that job ended up being $695. My son was with me for that. And that was basically it. Now, on that day, specifically on Thursday, randomly we lost power. Now, we had rain almost every day, but sporadically. Like, we're talking like an hour or two and then no rain. So it's been humid, super humid. Randomly, the power went out. Now, a couple towns over, there's been some power outages, or not towns, but like, I don't know, a couple miles away, there's been some power outages. So I'm convinced that this wasn't necessarily caused by storms directly. It was caused by them trying to fix some of the other things, and it just knocked us out of power. So we didn't end up having power for about 12 hours. In the midst of not having power, there was supposed to be a lot of rain that night. The sump pump that we set up the backup system for about a week and a half ago, or I think it was, I'm trying to think, it was last week. We set up that sump pump. That sump pump backup system that we did, where we had to run new pipes for the not duplicate, but the second discharge pipe. The customer is technically the same doctor as the one that I was talking about before, but this is at a different property. This is at his girlfriend's property. He calls me and says that an alarm's going off on the battery box, and they're trying to figure out why, because they have power. So I simply just, he sent some videos. I looked at it. It was very clear that at some point, I said, did the power go out at all? Because what happens is, if you are unaware of how these basement watchdog backup systems work, they have a panel, and the panel is very explanative as far as like what error messages you can get and things like that. If the power goes out, it lights up the power, or there's a power issue, but it just means that there's currently no power and that the battery is powering the backup. If the pump is, that means the water got high enough where the pump got activated, and then it sounds the alarm, and the alarm just has to be reset and just tries and clarifies that everything's working. In a situation where the power is on, but the pump was activated, there's a couple of different things that could have happened. The power could have gone out for a certain amount of time and the water rose, kicking on that thing. But then the power came back on. And then when the power came back on, the pump, the primary pump started engaging, but it did hit the backup float on the backup pump. That causes the pump alarm. Once you reset it, it goes away. But if the power comes back on, the power is never going to be lit up. So what I specifically asked them, if the power went out, they said the power did go out briefly. Because the power went out briefly, I assumed that it was because the primary pump wasn't working and the water rose. I told them to reset the alarm so that they would get new alarms. And I said, the pump activated at some point. How is the water coming over the sides? No, it wasn't coming over the sides, but there was some water in some various spots, but it looked as if the water was along where the wall meets the floor, because there's a thin crack there, and it's just a perfect spot, I guess, for for leaking. So that said, I told them to reset it, and I said, just keep an eye on it, but as long as the power is on, you should be fine, and because the pump works. Now, this is all the same time that I don't have power. Thursday night, my wife was also out of town. She left out of town that morning for a business trip, and I had my kids. My youngest had football practice, so I needed to get them all fed, but we didn't have power, so we went out to eat, came back, and I'm trying to just wrap up while we have no power. We have a generator, like just one on wheels, a portable generator that I set up when we lose power for more than a couple of hours to run our fridge and freezers so we don't lose our food, because that sucks when that happens. It's a lot of money out the door. So the generator was set up, but the generator doesn't power anything else. Like if we needed to, we could run a charger for our phones or something like that. But we don't have air conditioning. We don't have, the battery clocks, the security cameras, none of that stuff works when there's no power. No Wi-Fi, no computers, none of that stuff. So I did not, my work phone typically goes on to do not disturb. I believe it's at 7 p.m. and 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I don't do emergency calls. I don't advertise emergency calls, but I do have customers who sometimes do text me very late. I try not to respond because I don't want to give the impression that I'm available 24/7, especially because they're not asking me to come and do something. They're asking for a response. And the problem is that if you keep giving them the ability to get a hold of you in weird hours, they come to expect that you're going to be available in weird hours. Apparently, at about 9:45 that night, the doctor texted me and said that they were having issues where they seemed as if the water was rising too much and because of the rain, and the sump pump wasn't working properly. I didn't see the message. It's because my phone was on Do Not Disturb, and to be quite honest, I was actually probably getting ready for bed that late at night, or already in bed, to be honest. And I don't even keep my work phone by my bed. It's in a completely different room. Apparently what happened was the sump pump started to go, it got to the top. The dual float on the backup pump kicked in, but at that point there was so much water that it just wasn't able to keep up. Water came over the top of the pit. The customer was very distraught, stressed out, convinced that there was an issue. Because they couldn't get a hold of me, they called a plumber. Now, if anybody ever knows what happens when you call a plumber after hours, they charge an emergency fee. This specific plumber charged $300 per hour with a 2-hour minimum. So you're talking a $600 fee. When he came out, there were three things that he said that were incorrect with the setup that I did. One, he claimed that the backup pump was too close to the primary pump, which potentially could cause issues with the primary pump's float. Now, I'm not saying that's not possible. I've been in plenty of pits where it's like that, but the thing is, it's a Y. It gives you just enough space as long as you have the pump, the pump's off to the side. So I don't agree with that one. The primary reason something happened was because somehow the GFCI outlet that the primary pump was plugged into tripped. So the primary pump, despite them having power, they did not know it did not have power. So the primary pump basically was not going because it wasn't getting power. The backup pump is not plugged into the same exact plug. It's plugged into a plug next to it, which was not GFCI protected, I guess. And it didn't recognize that there was no power from that outlet, so it didn't engage immediately. So the backup was where it got up to the float level, and the float level then it kicked on and it was working, but the issue became because it was working and the water had gotten so high at that point, it couldn't keep up. It's just what happens. Then the plumber also stated that the pipe connection that I installed had a break in it and it needed to be addressed. That wasn't true either, because the actual pipe was technically the official basement dog pipe with the backflow valve, the flow valve on it, which has a hole drilled 45 degrees and for weeping so that the pump itself doesn't airlock. I bought this specifically because I didn't want to have to deal with trying to drill it and make sure that everything was the way it was supposed to be. It's supposed to output a little bit of water so that way when the water goes down, it doesn't seize up the pump. So the customer made a video of the plumber explaining what happened, but primarily it was the GFCI outlet, which was caused by the pump. I don't know what caused it, to be honest. I know that the pump was working before, and the pump had worked multiple times because there had been rain since I was there. So I don't know what caused the outlet to trip, but it tripped. So the plumber's solution was to switch the primary to the non-GFCI plug and the backup to the GFCI plug. I don't know why you would do that, but sure. Okay, fine. He's just trying to get power to the primary pump. That's fine, except for the fact that if there's an issue with the GFCI outlet, even if it's a bad outlet or something like that, you're then having that backup battery not have any, not be, connected to power. So that would be an issue too. So yeah, there's just a slew of things. But the thing that's frustrating is that the customer hired this person knowing it was going to cost $600. At the same time, I understand the customer's stress levels could be super high because obviously water's coming in, and really, what are you going to do? The problem is that the next morning he sent me a text message saying we had a very rough night. We had to call an emergency plumber because the system that you installed was not working properly. Please give me a call, or please let me know when you can be out here. Now, Friday, I was not planning on working because my wife was out of town, and it's literally the Friday before my kids go back to school. I was planning on doing something with them for the day, just to have something that we do. I immediately responded and said I can be there in about an hour because I did have to wait till my son was done with football practice anyway. So I went out there, took a look at the system, looked at the concerns that the plumber raised. There was no issues. Anything that I had installed, there was no problems. I then proceeded to test the system various different ways, put water in the pit, run the primary, take the primary off, make sure that the backup's working, that the backup works without power, that the float system works without power. Everything worked the way it was supposed to work. It was just that outlet somehow got tripped. I don't know how the outlet got tripped. And nobody else does either. That's the thing. Long story short, that pump got done. After I tested everything and everything was working properly, the girlfriend that's her house, she proceeded to say that the doctor probably just panicked and called the plumber, shouldn't have called the plumber, just should have waited till I got back in touch in the morning. But at the same time, I understand the problem. Like, you think that your basement's going to flood. You have no idea how much water is going to actually keep falling from the skies. And you don't know if you're at a point where you see water around your sump pump. You don't have no idea if that's going to be enough, if the water that you have there is going to stop. You don't know if it's going to keep flowing. Now, at the same time, her basement's not finished. Her basement has very little storage. Very little items that she stores down there. Most of them are in plastic bins. The easiest thing that I would have suggested instead of calling a plumber would have been get the stuff that's cardboard or not in plastic up, because the realistic nature of it getting 2 feet of water up there to go over these bins would have been so slim, it would have been ridiculous. And that's what I would have suggested. That said, she said that the doctor probably panicked because of the water and hired the plumber. So I figured I did what I needed to do. I never actually got paid for this job. That's the other thing. When I did the job 2 weeks ago, or last week, the issue was that there was a Wi-Fi adapter that's supposed to link to an app on your phone that tells you when you're having issues with your rear backup system. They had an issue where they didn't know the Wi-Fi password, and we couldn't finish the setup. So I told them I would come back. I also was coming back because there was a leader hose that I wanted to install to their dehumidifier to have it go directly into that sump pump pit. So that way it would constantly flow and they would always be working. So my plan was to go back at some point. I had already talked to them about coming back early next week, and everything was working. So it wasn't like there was a reason I needed to go back immediately. Mostly because they're very busy, I guess is the best way to put it. And when I say, like, do you have a free day next week? They're like, oh yeah, we can figure that out later. And they don't want to nail anything down right away, which is fine. But again, that's outside my control. So anyway, I sent the invoice for that job. And then the doctor reached out because he was paying for it and said, we need to talk about we've got a great relationship, but the situation that happened last night because of what happened with what you installed needs to be resolved. I didn't know what that meant. Had a conversation with him on the phone. He basically said that there needed to be some sort of accommodation for the stuff that they had to deal with that night. In my mind, I kept thinking, well, nothing that I had set up caused any of this. If I didn't set anything up, it would have been the exact same problem. The pump, the GFCI would have tripped. The primary pump wouldn't have worked. And if the primary pump didn't work, then the pump, you would have flooded too. if anything, the backup pumps at least saved it somewhat once it got high enough where it was actually pumping something. But again, that's not how customers view things. So ultimately what I came up with was I billed him for the work, and then I gave him a $150 credit, and I explained to him that I would give him $150 credits on the next 3 invoices that he has to make him whole on the plumbing. I don't have to do that. It's more of like a goodwill gesture because the customer is a great customer. They do give me good referrals. They have given me plenty of business. He does have me do some of the most minute, ridiculous things, but when you're getting paid as much as I'm getting paid, I'm okay with doing that. Moving boxes from one to another, or helping him clear out bookshelves of books and then having to box the books up to donate it, and charging as much as I charge. It's okay. I'm okay with doing, some frivolous tasks here and there as long as they're willing to pay. So that's what I ended up coming up with. He was content with that. So the job ended up being $17.25 for everything else that we did, which was also the garage organization, some grab bars, and then the entire system. Now, there was a lot of materials involved in that, and that was the other reason why I didn't want to eat the entire $600 was when I was on site, I had a helper with me the first time when we were setting everything up. We had close to $1,000 in materials. So if I would have given him the $600 off, I would have not lost money in the sense of I didn't make any money. I would have lost money when it came down to having to bill out the labor as well. I would have lost money regardless, but this way it kind of spreads that burden out over 4, but also requires him to continue to work with me in order to get that credit in the future. And I thought that was the best scenario when it comes to that. So yeah, that was not a fun scenario because I don't like when stuff like that happens, especially with really good customers. And it's very difficult to explain this kind of stuff over the phone. I thought I had a certain level of rapport with the customer. I do have a certain level of rapport with the customer, but the one thing that I was not counting on was the rapport that he had with the plumber was going to somehow outweigh my situation. Now you can see from the plumber's perspective, he comes out, all he does is trip a GFC, reset the GFCI, the pump starts working, waits till the water goes down, starts to go down to make sure that everything's working, but still is only there for 15, 20 minutes and bills them $600. He writes on the invoice that it was the float that wasn't engaging. Well, that's not true. The float did engage. The backup system worked exactly the way it was supposed to. And the float on the primary pump had nothing to do with, it wasn't working because of the float. It had to do with the fact that the GFCI was tripped. So the plumber has to warrant why he's charging $600. If he has a relationship with this customer, which the customer stated that he's used them before, he's going to feel bad for charging $600 for 15, 20 minutes of work. So they're going to write stuff down to try to push the blame onto somebody else. I get it. I don't agree with it, but I understand that they don't want to, they want to make it seem like, well, at least we did something for you because we couldn't have done this another way. They could have asked, hey, check the GFCI. I could have asked, to be honest. I'm not saying you're saying I couldn't. I didn't even think about the possibility of the GFCI because I assumed both of the outlets that were there, if there's one GFCI you could reset, I assumed that the second one would be ran through there because I don't know why it wouldn't be. That's typically how they work. That's why I can't stand when you have an outlet that's not GFCI protected and it is GFCI protected, but you don't have the buttons on it. So you can't reset that plug immediately. So yeah, that was that. But if I had to describe the week, it was, juggling storms and last minute jobs and reactions to customers. It was kind of a crazy week. And I have a bunch of stuff that I still have so much stuff on my plate coming up. And I also need to get to the point of finding an employee. And you can't do that when you're juggling as many jobs as we are and having all of the customers come up. I have, just to put in perspective, there's probably 3 or 4 other customers that I had already looked at work for that I have yet to put estimates together because I'm so far behind. In addition to that, I have customers who are saying, who were very understanding and said, we know that you're very busy. We will wait. And then they wait exactly 5 days and start asking me where the estimate is. I have customers who sign their estimate and then say, can you start the work in 4 days? That is not possible. And I explained this to them before I even sent them the estimate, because I want everyone to understand, hey, I'm willing to work with you, and I am very accommodating when it comes to your people's schedules, but you have to be accommodating to my schedules too, because I just have too much going on right now. I really need a second person to be able to send to take care of some of these other things. And then if I was able to actually have the second person, I could return some of these phone calls and start picking up additional work that I could then also then have the second person do. It's very difficult. My phone has been blowing up with calls, but the majority of them are for roof and fence repair, which I don't do. That sucks because they're just taking up a call, because somehow I'm getting suggested for fence repair, even though I don't do fence repair. It doesn't say it on my website. It doesn't say it on my Google profile, but for some reason I keep getting a ton of people calling me about it. And I know why. It's because they don't want to call a fencing company, so they call a handyman. Well, the problem is that in most cases they have multiple panels that need to be replaced, which you then need parts for, which you have to source from a fence company. That's why I don't want to do fence repair, because it's just too much. There's too much labor involved in some of these projects too. Like even if I had my helpers, it's a lot to have all of them doing that. And then fence repair is not very lucrative in my opinion. Most people think of their fence and they say, I paid $10,000 for this fence. Why am I going to pay $3,000, not $3,000, but why am I going to pay $2,000 to get 3 panels fixed when I could just get the whole new fence for $10,000? Well, because that's just what it costs. It's unfortunate, but that's how it goes. So I just don't do fence repair because of that very reason, because too many people spend so much time saying, can you fix this? Can you fix this? Can you fix this? And then you tell them how much it's going to be, and then they immediately are like, well, that's a 20%, 25% of what I paid for the entire fence. I know, and that's unfortunate, but that's what it takes. So yeah, it's been a crazy week. I've got 2 more days with my employees. I'm trying to get them over to that porch to work this week, so that they can get some stuff done. Yeah. It's been crazy. These storms have kind of put a wrench in a lot of different things, and I really need these storms to just stop. I actually like storms. I just don't like the destructive storms that cause so much damage that everybody and their brother needs to get business. It'd be different if I was flush with employees and had plenty of employees to send all over the place to do work, but I just don't. When I get a phone call and it's like, hey, I need you to, I had a phone call from a LaTip member who said that their mother-in-law had a tree branch fall on their house and they had a hole on their roof. Immediately I'm like, okay, I could chop the branch, I could chop the tree up to a certain degree, as long as it's not a huge tree, and I can get the house tarped, but that's a temporary thing. Outside of that, I can't do anything else. And then I'm sitting here thinking, how am I going to do that with my schedule that I already have and the limitations that I have within my schedule? I can't just drop everything, not be around for, huge lengths of time, because my family relies on me to have certain things done. So yeah, it's been a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, I still need to get my truck in the shop in order to get it looked at from the shop so that they can, make the adjustments with the insurance company to make sure that we all get everything covered, just to make sure that I can get this fixed when I actually have time, which is not going to be any time in the immediate future. But yeah, if you're a religious person, pray for me, because I definitely need to get an employee, and I need just a little bit less stuff happening to be able to get everything back to running smoothly. And I know it's not, as a business owner, it's not going to run smoothly because there's just so much stuff going on. And it's just, if it's not one thing, it's another thing. It's just how it goes. So with all that being said, thank you so much to all the subscribers. Thank you for the recent comments on the videos. Greatly appreciate it. I've been making sure that I try to respond to those comments as they come in. So leave comments and subscribe if you're not already. Like the video, share it with other tradespeople that may get something out of it. If you're listening to this on YouTube Music. It is available as obviously a video as well, where you'll see before and after shots of some of the work that we do. But if you're on YouTube and you think to yourself, hey, I don't really necessarily want to watch this for an hour while this guy talks, you can subscribe on YouTube Music as a podcast. Look for This Week in the Field in the search bar, and it'll pop up, and you can just listen to the episodes as you drive around. With all of that being said, this has been This Week in the Field. It's been a crazy week in the field, but it has been a week in the field. I am the handyman in the field, Dustin. We'll see you guys next time.